Welcome to the Hasson Studio and our introduction to the Speedball bent nib pens. In this section, we'll be going over the Speedball A nib pen, why it was invented, and what kind of lettering it can achieve. So one of the things about the Speedball pens is that they're a real funny looking pen. If you've used a Speedball pen or looked at Speedball pens, you might be asking yourself, what in the heck is the deal with this nib that's bent? All of these nibs have a bend in them. And there's a reason for those bends, and we'll go over that right now. What was happening at the time was there were different lettering styles coming out of Europe. So this is work of Rennie Mackintosh. Rennie Mackintosh is famous for his elongated figures and his elongated letters. And so Mackintosh was very diverse. In this particular case, there's circular elements in here, and so even though his figures are elongated, he's contrasted that with circular elements of lettering. Same thing here, we've got an elongated figure, but then he's contrasted that with very dense lettering. But what he's perhaps known the best for are these two types of posters and this lettering down here. It's a little bit more elongated, and he's really messed around with the proportions quite a bit. Rennie Mackintosh was an architect. This is one of his drawings for the Glasgow School Board building. And you'll notice that he's got very, very tall French paned windows throughout his design. And he would carry those designs out throughout his other pursuits. So he designed furniture, and you can see a lot of the squares. You see a very elongated design, and then you see lots of different squares. And so when he was making his furniture, all of these design elements translated even into his lettering. And so the Willow Tea Room, the sign that he designed here, you'll see that he's double crossed his H, for example. And you'll see in this particular piece, all of the bold letters, the cross of the E and the bold letter of the R, are very, very high crossed letters. And so the artists, the lettering artists in America were very aware of this. They began to be aware, and they began to see these things, and it began to affect what they're trying to do. You'll also notice that these letters are uniform width lines. So the lines are not, as a broad edge pen would do, give a thick line on the pull stroke and a thin line on the oblique stroke. These are drawn letters that have uniform width lines. In printers' terms, those letters are called Gothic. They're different than what we call Gothic. We think of Textura or Old English as a Gothic letter, but in these particular case, the printer's term for uniform width stroke is Gothic. At the same time, around 1908 to 1910, there was an artist named Ludwig Hohlwein. He was a German artist, one of the best poster artists that you can imagine. And so he would do really dense lettering. This lettering began to be called grotesques. The reason is because grotesque meaning ugly, because they didn't have the thicks and the thins. And so you can see these drawn letters with inconsistent lines, but that they're obviously drawn. And so as these lettering styles became popular, it became more difficult for the show card artists to be able to do these letters at small sizes quickly. They could do these letters with a brush by twirling the brush at larger sizes, but the smaller sizes, it took more time and more concentration, and the show card writers had to get things out quickly. Ross George and William Gordon together invented a pen that had a bent nib. One of the most important reasons that this pen, which they called the Speedball pen, became popular and became a revolutionary tool in commercial lettering is because it could replicate those strokes with one stroke of the pen. So this is an example of William Gordon and single stroke lettering. When I say single stroke lettering, I mean that each stroke of the pen can be done with one width of the pen. And so that A can be done with, well, it would normally be done with 3 strokes, but he has a little crossbar on the top, doesn't he? So that would be 4 strokes. But the E or the F, for example, the F would be done in 3 strokes. Very simple. It really saved time. They didn't have to outline letters. They didn't have to fix the thicks and the thins or draw their letters. They could just make these letters in 1 stroke. He came up with some beautiful letter forms. If you look at this G and the lowercase g, it's just a really phenomenal letter form, and some really beautiful ways that he worked with that. Also, he could take that pen, that broad edge pen with that flat lettering shoe and turn it over, and he could add what the lettering artists of the time called spurs. Spurs are what we would think of as serifs. So here's that same Rennie Mackintosh style with the high-waisted, the high bowl on the R, the high cross on the E and the F, and that's now translated to what I guess could be called a more formal looking letter that was called, at the time, spurred Gothic. This is William Gordon's spurred Gothic. It's the precursor to one of the fonts that we know as copperplate Gothic. So on the left is the hand-done version, on the right is the digital version. These square lettering tools also could give a really bold look, and so the single-stroke poster became a style that was very easy to replicate, make bold strokes on show card signs that could be read from across the room, and they would be able to very quickly create something that was unique that most other show card artists couldn't do because they didn't have this particular tool. These are from the collection of Ross George, by the way, actual show cards, which are very rare these days because they were temporary. So we felt lucky to find these in the archives. And so they worked with all different kinds of letter formation in order to try to be able to create different varying styles in the styles that were coming out of Europe, both Rennie Mackintosh and the bold, grotesque styles that they would see in posters like artists like Ludwig Hohlwein. They would also use this pen at smaller sizes to attempt to replicate some of the type styles of the time that they like. So Roycroft Display is that same type of type style that you saw in the Saturday Evening Post. Jensen Bold Condensed was a popular type style of the time. And so here are attempts to work at that with hand lettering and make modifications so that it be done quickly and done in hand lettering. At the time also, approximately 1914, 1915, we're working with silent movie titles. Interestingly enough, if you've studied with accomplished lettering artists who have taught you things, we today would call these monoline letters, but of course in the time of the silent movies they called them monotone letters. I remember the movie Tone News, and so it just makes sense that they would call them monotone letters. This is an example by Ross George. This is an original card that appeared in one of the Speedball textbooks, and using this square poster. Now, one of the things about the Speedball nib is that it has 3 distinct tines. And so in this original card, when you look close up, you actually are seeing what appears to be 3 separate strokes, but they're not. They're 3 separate tines dragging the ink through those strokes. And so those are single stroke letters. So each of these strokes in the A, this was made with 3 strokes. One of my favorite things to work with is this A pen. I think it's the most challenging and also perhaps the most rewarding. Those of you who have worked with formal Roman letters with serifs will recognize that we're adding serifs to these letters, but we have a thick and thin. Well, the A pen gives the ability to not work with thick and thins, add serifs, and make a different style of Roman letter. And I really, really appreciate actually making some of these Roman letters. So also, like the lettering artists of 1910, I sometimes get bored with doing ABCs, so sometimes it's a challenge to try and write them backwards and see if you can remember. So the caps and the lowercase are some of the letters that are the main focus of the class that I'm teaching in Writing with a Bent Nib, Class 2. These are excerpts from the handout book. These are actually facsimile size lettering excerpts. If you print these out on 8.5 by 11 pages and you want to really try and get the feel of these letter forms, you can actually trace these letters. And so it would allow you to go ahead and not only trace the letters to get the feel of the forms, but also get the feel. So let me do, if I could, a quick demonstration, if you don't mind. So this is an A series pen. These are the square pens. I'm going to use the smaller pen. I'm going to work one square, and I'm just going to place the pen down on the page. By the way, you will have to hold this pen just a bit flatter. Calligraphers are used to holding the pen upright, more upright, so that they can get a hairline. But in this particular case, in order to keep this flat lettering shoe on the page, you'll need to hold the pen more like a pencil. And you'll see this in all of the Speedball, early Speedball textbooks, trying to let lettering artists know how to use that pen. In addition, I was trained to fill my pen instead of dip my pen. So I actually have a brush that is filled with ink, and I will usually fill it from one side. It helps me to get a smoother flow in the pen. And so I'm just going to make a Roman style letter. And then I will put my pen in the stem stroke, come out of the stem stroke to make the bowl, and then come back in the stem stroke. And now I have a couple of different things. My letters come a little bit lower the baseline, but if I want to even this out, I'm now going to turn my pen over, and I'm using the other side of the pen, and I'm going to make my serif, or spur, as they called it in 1910, and I'm just going to pull that serif out. I'll rotate my hand, I'll also make the serif here, and then come back and pull that out. If I was going to make a B, simply I'm just literally rocking my pen at the top, pulling, and I'm letting the pen do the work. I'm just following the pen. It's a very simple process. I'm going to spring out of the stem stroke, and because I'm used to broad edge pen, I usually make this bowl stroke in 2 strokes. You can make this in 1 stroke. I'm just so used to making it in 2 strokes that I'm just going to bring it back up and meet that pen. I'm then going to turn my pen over, and I'm going to add the serif to the top, add the serif to the bottom. This is not the most beautiful letter, but this will give you an idea of one of the ways to make the letters. If I wanted to make a capital A and I'm going to work on a diagonal, I'm actually going to turn my hand the way I want the pen to go, and I'm going to simply pull, turn my hand again the way I want the pen to go, pull. I'm flattening my pen, and I'm simply going to make a crossways stroke. 1, 2, 3. And so if you're doing Rennie Mackintosh letters and you want to work with a very simple way for that stroke, that's fine. Now I have 2 ways that I can finish this letter. I'm going to put a point on the top of this letter. So again, I'm going to turn my pen over to use the thin part. I'm going to follow this line and very simply make a point. And then if I wanted to, I can either do an angled serif or a flat serif. I would say that it's a little bit more formal with the flat serif, so I'll just go with that in this particular instance and quickly make these serifs. As far as the Rennie Mackintosh letters, let's say that I wanted to make that really, really elongated R. Well, I might decide that I'm going to make the bowl of that R that big. And if I did that, then, or that could be the top of the B, couldn't it? If I did that, then I would also come back in. So let's go ahead and put that there. Then I would also, if I wanted to follow that logic, would make the crossbar of the E quite a bit up here. I also could turn this, kick that leg of the R out just a little bit. So depending on the types of letters, this really creates an easy way in order to make these monotone or monoline or Gothic letters, as the printers call them. Okay, I hope that this has given you some ideas on how to use these pens. I'd really encourage you to give them a try. And by the way, I've created a whole class on these bent nib pens. So you'll see just below me the sandiaworkshops.art. That is the website that I'll be hosting these on. You can go to my page and sign up for the email list. There's 5 different sections. Also, when you go to sign up, you will get an article that's written by both myself and Michael Clark. It was published in Bound and Lettered, and it's an article on how to use the bent nib and some of the techniques that both Michael and I use. There's a sign up button. You can get that free download and read to your heart's content. And then these are each of the class sections. You'll be able to select an individual class or sign up for a package. So thank you for stopping by. I'll see you next time.